I came to interview some bloke, but he's looking for building defects on the stairs. Can I introduce you to the man who's been entertaining you all week at Elevenses, but is now going to be on the other side of the questioning, Paul Sewell.
We are going to be gentle with each other, aren't we?
We are indeed, yes. I promised you that, but I lied. Because, the thing about Paul, you heard George Ezra there. He was listening to George Ezra in Tuscany 2 years ago, was Mr. Sewell. When he decided there was only so long you could listen to George Ezra, he felt he had nothing to do, and he decided to write a book. And 120,000 words later is this book, Half a Lettuce. Now, I just let you into a secret. Paul, talk about hiding your light under a lettuce or a bushel. He's desperately keen not to be thought to be promoting this. So I want to promote it. I'm making this interview all about this book because it's a fabulous story. And we were due to launch it last year, but of course it launched at a time when we couldn't do the event at Cottingham. And maybe there are people who don't know about this book. The whole business school know about it because they put it on their entrepreneurs reading list. The Dale Carnegie Great Training Center know about it because they've done the same thing. It is a fascinating slice. Business manual, a lot of memoir, but a fascinating slice of social history. So I want to talk to Paul about this today, and every bit of this, every theme right from Paul's childhood, there's a business lesson. It's absolutely consistent with Humber Business Week. But just to warn you, at the end, it's your turn. You've got 10, 15 minutes to interrogate Paul Sewell, and I'll be asking Paul to tell you two truths and a lie, and you have to pick what the lie is. So that comes later on. But for now, Paul, I watched you actually interviewing this week, and I was very impressed with everything except those bloody socks. They are the most terrible socks.
I got the most awful tweet from him, bollocking me about these socks. And he should know. Tell me I can't do that. I said, Sue, where's the socks? Have they been washed? I'm wearing them today. So there they are.
Just to antagonise me. But I was very impressed because you had no notes at all. Yeah? Or you didn't appear to have any notes.
No, not really.
You were just having a chat, whereas I've got this.
Yeah.
It was good enough for Michael Parkinson, it's good enough for me.
It's good enough for you, yeah.
But it was a great week, and I enjoyed all that. You enjoyed it as well? You had a good time?
Yeah, it was some great people, wasn't there? You know, very privileged to meet those type of people and have a chat with them. So yeah, I think it all went really well.
So tell me about the book. Writing that was a huge enterprise to get it done in what, 8 months? 6 months?
Yeah, we've got this thing. I have this thing at the Sewell Group. Any initiative has got to get done, dusted, and make its impact in 6 months, or else it's not worth doing. And I thought I can't have that type of thing at the Sewell Group without imposing it on myself. So I thought if I'm going to do it, and you bullied me to do it, I don't know.
Probably a few others here. The stories.
No, but when you read the first chapter and you just said you've got to finish it, and you kept prodding me with a sharp stick, and so you need to declare your conflicts.
Well, I don't get anything out of it. I mean, I'm not getting any royalties off the bloody thing.
Neither am I.
But, talk about stories. The title of the book is Half a Lettuce, right? Where does that come from?
Well, the book was originally going to be called I Think I Got Away With It, and that showcases my imposter syndrome, but I didn't think that was such a good title. So within 5 minutes, I thought I'd better call it something, a story I tell whenever I speak, which is about my upbringing in Cottingham and my dad's fruit and veg business. He had lots of shops and in Hull, but he loved the stall in York Market. The stall in York Market, and I loved it as well when I used to go. It was busy, it was bustling, it was fun, and he loved it, all apart from the American tourists. and there's a lot of American tourists in York, and he didn't like them because he used to touch his peaches, and he didn't used to like his peaches being touched very much. But we always had a runner, a helper, always a young kid, 14, 15, 16, to bring the gear from the wagon onto the stall and get it flashed up. And this particular one was called Mike. And one day, an American tourist came up and asked Mike if he could have half a lettuce. And Mike didn't know how to react, so he went behind the stall to see my dad, who used to sit on an orange box, like a passable impression of a Yorkshire Buddha, sat there. And he went round the stall and said, Mr. Sewell, this knobhead American wants half a lettuce. And he didn't realise the American tourist had followed him round and was stood right there. And he looked at the American tourist and said, and this gentleman wants the other half. And that's supposed to be funny, by the way, but it's not really.
I think it's right. Cracks me up.
At the end of the day, my dad was really impressed by this quick thinking, because Mike was a bottom grade kid at school. He had to do this for a few bob. And he said, Mike, that was really quick thinking. Tell me, how long have you been with me? He said, 2 weeks, Mr. Sewell. He said, but that's not a York accent, is it? He said, no, it's Hull accent. He said, I'm from Hessel Road in Hull. He said, well, what are you doing here? Why do you leave? He said, family had to get out. It's full of prostitutes and rugby players. My dad said, my wife's from Hessel Road. And Mike said, who's she play for? And my dad really liked it. We called it nous, and it's something above academic qualifications, technical ability. It's a streetwise intelligence that my dad looked for, and actually we look for at work as well.
But you are the product of two entrepreneurs. So you said your dad had a few shops. You had a shop in Waterloo Street, you had a shop in Charles Street, you had a shop in Beverley Road.
Yeah.
You had the York marketplace.
Yeah.
I mean, he was an entrepreneur, and your mother was from a family of market gardeners.
Yeah.
So they had a flower stall.
Yeah.
So you started off as, watching your dad as a business person, I guess. You would
Very
have learned lessons
entrepreneurial
from
upbringing. Yeah. I mean, the genesis of the Union was in Hull Market, now refurbished. When my mother was on the flower stall and my dad was on the fruit stall, he was 19, she was 17, and that was the genesis of my side of the family.
Good name for a group, Genesis.
Not bad.
But your dad, you're from a family of 4. You're the youngest of 4. But your dad was from a family of 20 children.
Yeah.
He had 19 siblings.
Yeah.
All to the same parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of sympathy for your maternal grandmother.
Well, the family folklore has it she only had sex 10 times, because there are 6 sets of twins in these 20 kids. And she's an Irish Protestant, like McConnell of Dublin, and married this poor Hull fruiterer who did a bit of fruitering when he had time.
Yeah, crikey. Talking about business lessons, he had all those shops, but then took you with him when he went to get another shop in a place he really wanted, because it was on the Gypsyville, and he would pick up the trade from what was then a thriving fishing community in Hessel Road. Yeah. Tell me about that business lesson you learnt from your dad.
Well, I think I was 13 or 14. He picked me up from Boothbury Park because I was in the academy at Hull City, and he always picked me up, but he didn't go back to Cottingham this day. He drove up North Road to Gypsyville, and there was this old rickety old fruit shop, a very old-fashioned thing, and he didn't tell me what we were doing. He just took me in to meet Mr. and Mrs. Gladstone, and if there's ever a couple who you could tell what they were like by their name, it was them. They were quite an old couple. They took him into the back, and I didn't know that he was going to buy their fruit shop. And he said, my dad wasn't particularly articulate man, but the little speech he gave that day to them astounded me, and I've never forgotten it. He just said, Mr. and Mrs. Gladstone, I'm glad you've got your shop up for sale and you're talking to me. I value it all in at £3,500, so we won't mess in about with offers and counter offers. I value it at £3,500 because that's what it's worth to me. That offer's open till close of business tomorrow night. I hope you take it because I think I could make a success of it. But if you don't, it's been really nice meeting you. And they accepted it there and then. My dad didn't think, oh God, I've overpaid for it. They've snapped my hand off. He put a value on it of what it was worth to him, and that's what he paid. and you hear so much positional bargaining, and you've not got a deal until the other person's squeaking or walking away and you've hit the walk away. We've never done that. I've never done that. I've always put the value I thought on something, and that was it.
Which is sort of counterintuitive, because people who don't know, or perhaps do know about business, but their image is that a business person drives a hard bargain and looks for the lowest price, and this concept that you value it, and if that's what it's worth to you, that's what you'll pay, no more, no less. It must have been quite, your dad was an early kind of adopter.
Well, I'm sure it was not always right, Alan, but it certainly stopped a lot of messing around and backwards and forwards, and the deal was done, and we got on with things. Yeah. And yes, maybe because now they was particularly good at positional bargaining, I don't know.
Yeah, well, he did all right, did your dad?
He didn't do bad.
And your mother, tell me about your mother's experience with why she was brought up by her aunt and uncle.
Well, mother's from a relatively big family. I think there was 5 of them. And because there was a bit of problem bringing her up, my grandparents gave her away to an auntie and uncle until she was 13, 14 years of age and economically active. And then they decided they wanted her back. And so it was a little cottage down Endyke Lane, and they went down to see the auntie and uncle and said it's about time she came back home now. And auntie and uncle ended up in a row which my mother was listening to from up in the bedroom at the cottage, until she was brought down and asked to decide who she wanted to bring her up from there on in. And she plumped for my auntie and uncle. And my uncle was Uncle Ted with his wooden leg, blown off in the First World War. And when Mum had me, she named her last child after him, Edwin, my Uncle Ted.
Took a lot for you to admit that, so your middle name is Edwin.
It's a bit Rodney Trotter at the wedding, isn't it? It was, yeah, I'm afraid so.
But you know, what happened to your mum could be a Thomas Hardy novel. You know, 14 years of age, choose between your parents and your aunt and uncle that have brought you up. That is an incredible story. I mean, you got on with your father better than your mother. Do you think some of that had an effect on your mother?
Yeah, I mean, Mum didn't want me, you know. She was patently obvious about that. She brought 3 kids up on her own in the Second World War, while my dad was away fighting in Burma, and I came along when they were teenagers, much later, and she made it quite plain that she'd finished her child rearing years and regretted the fact I was born, and so I'm in the scullery with our little corgi, Tully, and hearing her rant and rave and dance around saying, I hate dogs and I hate kids. And Tully and I looked at each other and thought, that refers to us, mate, you do realise that. But you know, she serviced me materially. I was safe, secure, well-dressed, fed, she was always there. She just didn't have the skills to engage me, you know, and sort of nurture me as a mother normally would. And
she'd been bringing up your twin elder. You got twins as well, a lot of twins in your family. Yeah. And then your dad comes back.
Yeah, Dad went off to fight the Japanese in Burma in 1941, 42, something like that, when they came into the war, and that was a nasty war. You know, he never spoke about it. But I visited Sensoto Island in a battle simulation scene when I was elder in Singapore, and you saw to take a young kid of 19, 20 or whatever he was out of Hull into the steamy jungles of Burma to fight this fearsome enemy. But anyway, he came back in 1945 down to Devon Street on a beautiful summer's day. All the kids were playing out. Mum went to meet him, and he had to ask which kids were his, which maybe occurred a little bit in those days.
Yeah.
And so he didn't really have the bond with my siblings. But when I was born, my mother had finished her child rearing years. It was the beginning of his, and so he really spoilt me, to be honest. And he had the ability to, because my siblings had quite an austere upbringing, and I had quite a privileged upbringing, because he was a successful businessman by then.
Well, tell us a bit about what it was like growing up in the 50s and 60s in a very different Cottingham, I would imagine, certainly a very different heart.
Well, it was divorced, a bit more divorced from the city of Hull than it is now. I mean, it's part of Hull now, really, but it was much more of a village then. Supposedly the biggest village in England. Cottingham appeared to be in colour, and when I went into the city of Hull, it seemed to be a monochrome of bomb sites and everything was in black and white and sepia. And when I got back to Cottingham Wrekin, that seemed to be in colour. So there was that definition between the two places. And it was a nice time to be, I mean, the 60s was a nice time to be brought up, Alan. You know, I mean, the Cultural Revolution after the austerity of war and rationing and everything was just easing. And so some of the stuff that happened in the 60s and the early 70s, I'm really privileged to be brought up at that time. I think there were still the freedoms and the relaxations of a nice place to live, but there was the feeling of something in the air. Is that Genesis? No. That's Phil, isn't it? You know, so I feel very privileged to have been brought up in the 60s and early 70s.
You were, so it's a happy childhood, you would say?
Yeah, despite some of the stuff in the book, we all have those moments, don't we? But yeah, very secure. In fact, I think I sort of sneaked an upbringing where nobody else noticed, to be honest, because there was no pressure to do anything. Ride the bike, get your exams, be successful at school. You were just loved and nurtured and did what you wanted to do. And so kids that have this enormous pressure to attain nowadays, I really feel sorry for, because I think if you just urge to do the best you can and be the best you can be, it releases you to go for the stuff you're happiest doing, and therefore you can be great at it. And as I say, I really regret some of the pressure I see put on kids nowadays.
But I could understand that, you know, feeling that you didn't have to perform or didn't have to attain or achieve things because you were going to follow your father into a very successful fruit and veg business, you know, with what, 6 shops by now, not just in Hull but outside of Hull. You never had any interest whatsoever in following your father's footsteps?
Mornings looked a bit early for me, Alan, going down Humber Street at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and setting off to York at 4 in the morning to get the stall up. No, I discovered football by then, and every fibre of my body from sort of 10 or 11 wanted to be a professional footballer, because that seemed much more like the life for me.
I'm going to talk a bit about that in a second, and even for people who are just totally bored with football, and I understand there are a few of them, Paul's bit on football in the book has much wider interest than just if you're a football fan. But I'll come on to that in a second. Here's something that was a bit brutal about our generation, the 11 plus. You failed.
Yeah.
I mean, that term failed at 11 years of age seems barbaric in itself, but you didn't pass. And I've met lots of people who didn't, John Godber, John Prescott, who still have that, not so much a chip on their shoulder, but they still feel a sense of failure from an age of 11.
Oh yeah, you're recovering from that time. I mean, I had a great quote many years ago about when the kids leave school in the UK at the moment, and you say, well, 15, 16, you said, no, they leave school when you fail them. And I think there was a little bit of that in me. But, you know, none of my family had passed the 11 plus, but my mother felt, because I'd had such a privileged upbringing compared to my siblings, that I should have done. And so when I told her that I hadn't, handed her the envelope, she decided to give me a good hiding as her reaction. And I thought, this is a bit outrageous. And I wasn't bothered, because Cottingham Secondary School had a great football team. You know, there's people like Stuart Pearson up there who went on to play for Manchester United in England, and we had a great football team. Cottingham had a great football altogether, and I didn't want to go to Beverley Grammar. I wanted to go with my mates up to Cottingham Secondary School, which is what I did. And
but you didn't want to get a beating for failing the 11 plus, but you did.
Well, John Godber did as well, Alan.
Did he?
I'll never forget when I first met John. He said to me, we're having a coffee, and he said, I failed my 11 plus, you know, Paul. I said, he's probably watching. And I said, yeah, I did too as well, John. He said, yeah, but the thing is with me, my mother gave me a good hiding. I said, John, we should start a support group.
Yeah. A few years ago now, but it still lives with you. But I'm still not going to get onto football yet, because although you failed your 11 plus, and although you were more interested in football than studying at Cottingham Secondary Modern, you left there with good A-levels.
Yeah, he wasn't supposed to do any of that at secondary school. It was vocational stuff then, but there was a cohort of about half a dozen teachers that I think wanted to prove a crap education system wrong. And they saw one or two kids who were developed at different times, about half a dozen of us, and we did O-levels where you're supposed to. The O-levels were good enough to do A-levels. And because of two teachers, I got A-level pure maths, applied maths and physics. And because they found out something, I couldn't do arithmetic, or I was crap at trigonometry and stuff like that. But two things happened, Alan, that had a massive influence on my life. A couple of people believed in me, and they found out what I was great at. And to me, looking at people, you've got to believe in the people you want to nurture, and you've got to find out what they're great at. And if you do that, you will get to fulfil their potential.
So it was algebra that you
Yeah, it was
latched onto.
algebra, where you ascribe a letter to an unknown, and then we got into the calculus, and for some crazy reason I just got it. Everybody else is really struggling with that, and I thought, well, no, it's that, and the teacher said, what is this guy? He gets it, and that was so much a part of everything I did from then in, structural engineering and stuff like that. So I got good at, I was believed in by a couple of people, got good at two or three things, and I breezed it right through to a first at Leeds on that.
Cottingham were ahead of their time, Cottingham secondary model.
Oh, I think so.
I mean, there must have been only a couple of you that were allowed to stay on to take A-levels.
Six of us. And, you know, it's just a crazy thing to judge kids at 11 years of age and then put them on a path that they're going to work with their hands and they're going into academia. And judging kids even now with SATs at such early ages, so they get stressed about results of tests when they're such a young age, and they should just be enjoying life. Don't get me on about the education system, Alan.
I was just thinking, Paul, you could get any group, these are all far too young to be of our generation, but any group from our generation that lived through the 11 plus, and you'd have half of them saying it was a good thing, and you know, it's a shame they got rid of it, and half of them would be saying it's a terrible thing. It was usually the half who failed or passed. But you wanted to be a footballer, and you were, I mean, lots of kids, I wanted to be a footballer, but you had at least a modicum of talent. It wasn't an unrealistic ambition for you.
No, I was always best player in the school, and then I got into the East Riding team. I was best player in the East Riding team. Got into the Yorkshire team. Do you know the nice thing about sport is it's a great lesson for life. No matter how good you are, you always meet somebody who's better than you are. And then when I got to that level, and then when I got to Hull City, Hull City had one of the first academies in the country. Harold Needler was the benefactor that produced 3 great players to take us up the leagues, Wagstaff, Houghton and Chiltern, new floodlights, a gym. He revolutionised, and in that gym every Tuesday and Thursday they used to take the cream of young local football talent because they didn't want to pay the transfer fees to pay for those 3. So they're one of the first clubs in the country to develop their own. And every Tuesday and Thursday, when you were up to 13, I think you went at 5 o'clock, and when you were out over 13, you went at 7 o'clock, and I went right through the 5 years.
Ken Wagstaff was your hero on the pitch, but wasn't such a hero once you
Oh, that story.
in the physio.
I know I get asked to tell that. Well, he was a real hero. He would have played, him and Chiltern, Chris Chiltern, bless him, has just died. They would have played in England's 1966 World Cup winning squad if they'd been with the Premier, with a top flight club. They were amazing. Chiltern was the workhorse battering ram, but Waggy was just pure class. When he put Gordon Banks on his backside, Gordon Banks was the England goalkeeper, big cup match at Hull City, he confronted Gordon Banks, he gave him the eye one way, looked at the other, Gordon Banks went on his backside and he rolled the ball in at the other side. And I thought at that time, he was my hero. I should have known he wasn't such a great person when he unceremoniously refused me an autograph when I was a kid. But by the time I'd made the academy, I got a knock in the gym one day, and I was told to go down to the treatment room for the physio to have a look at it. And the physios in those days were just all players who had no knowledge of anatomy or anything at all. You got a sponge, you got a sponge and banged a heat lamp on wherever it was, and that was it. Anyway, Jimmy Lodge was massive moustache, green hair, big glasses, and evidently a great player in his day. Played for Scotland, and I'll never forget there was a dewdrop on his moustache slipping off, and I was just looking at this dewdrop, and then I noticed to the side of me there was somebody else on the other treatment table, and it was Waggy. And here, this icon of mine all my life, I'm getting to go through a half an hour's treatment with him, and I laid on the other table and I didn't even look at him. The problem is he didn't look at me either, and it was the most excruciating half an hour I have ever spent. And I came out and thought, you know, if I ever get to be somebody like Waggy and there's a young kid comes in, I think I might talk to him and encourage him a bit. But he didn't. So, but he's still a great player.
Yeah, never meet your heroes, they say.
Yeah.
So you still are thinking you're going to be a footballer. You've got your A-levels now. You don't know, you don't want to go into the fruit and veg trade, you know that. And you talk to a youth employment officer in Beverley about what you're going to do. And he goes through a compendium of careers, and he stops at B.
Well, I'd been offered a full-time contract at Blackpool, we were in the first division then, and things went wrong when they sacked the manager, and I just had to very quickly think of something to do not to get up early in the morning. So I went to the youth employment officer and said, I need a job, because I got offers to go on trials to Aston Villa and Barnsley for a month. So I went to the youth employment officer in Beverley and said, can you get me a job that will let me off for a month to go to Barnsley, a month to go to Aston Villa? And he said, no, I can't. He said, but look at these A-levels. He said, you'll walk onto a course with these A-levels. He said, and university, the first year, you'll have plenty of time. So he said, you want to be outdoors, you're a footballer, right? So he got his company, came for B for building. He said, building, Leeds Polytechnic as it was then. Course starts in 2 weeks' time. Get yourself there. So there's a guy who's got no conception of space and form, no manual dexterity and ability at all, and I'm going to be a bloody builder. And it's strange how life happens, isn't it?
Well, it's strange how it happens to you, because you decided to go on this, what was it, Bachelor of Science degree?
BSc, yeah.
At Leeds Polytechnic, and you go into, this is such an incredible story, you go into a place where the registrar is reading out the names of the students, and he says Sewell, and 2 hands go up, and he says Sewell from Hull, and the same 2 hands stay up, and you meet Dennis Sewell, whose family have owned a building company in Hull since 1876.
Yeah. You have read the book, haven't you?
but this is an amazing chance. I mean, you don't know what you want to do. You're going for a builder because that's you stopped at B and you can get time off to go for trials. You not only end up going to university to study, which you weren't that interested in, you meet another person called Sewell who will change your life.
Yeah. Well, when you get round to writing, and you'll be the same because there's a book in everybody, chance meetings affect your life. And that's chance meetings certainly affected my life. The problem I see now is we don't put ourselves in the way of chance meetings as much as we used to, because we all sit in front, talk to each other in front of the screen. That's Business Week. Come to a cohort of people in Business Week and have a chance meeting with another business person. And I regret, Alan, I think we do that less than we used to. And therefore those chance meetings don't get the chance to change your life.
Well, I suppose we're here in a Hull University building, but the accent now is on qualifications, and if you haven't got the qualifications, it doesn't matter who you meet or what the chance is, you won't get an opportunity unless you work for Sewell Group, of course.
Yes, we've got a fair few people at the top that don't really have those qualifications. That's because you know how big we are in social mobility. Social mobility gets any business fishing in a bigger pond. There's a war for talent on in British business at the moment, because there's more of a war for talent than there is for customers. And you get the right talent in your building, and treat them right, and you will be successful. Success is inevitable. The problem is the kids coming out of college and university are much more discerning and are really choosy about where they're going to go for a wear. But there's a cohort of people wider than that that don't have that chance, that, like me, will probably just as able, and is it 75%, Rachel Becks, of our top senior leadership team have not been through the formal route? We would have denied our chance of those 75% of people that are so talented. So social mobility is a business thing. It's not a social do-good thing. It's a business thing. Talent is spread equally amongst the population. Opportunities aren't. So wise businesses say, well, we have to compete like hell for that cohort, or we're doing the milk round and they've got 4 job offers that they can say yes to. But there's some people a bit more unlikely that if you can spot the talent in them and the nous in them, it's good for your business. And it's certainly proved successful at Sewell.
And once you were doing the degree, and once you got a first, were you suddenly attracted to this industry, to be a builder? Was this suddenly something that you thought you'd spend your life doing? Because you do say in the book, which I think is a very revealing moment, that you came to the conclusion you just weren't good enough to be a top footballer. Now, lots of people could have, given your background, the offer from Tommy Docherty ringing you up saying, come and play for Aston Villa, could have said, oh, the reason you're not a professional footballer is because things didn't go right for you. You had a knee injury, you had problems with your eyes. You could have made all those excuses, but you actually say in the book, you just weren't good enough.
Yeah, that's right. I think self-awareness is a big thing, isn't it? You can't be delusional. You know, we work hard on self-awareness at the Sewell Group, and that's the platform to build all your aspirations on, isn't it, if you're self-aware. And no, I wasn't good enough. And I'm not a good enough builder either. Dennis was a good builder, and there was lots of good builder when I went to F. Sewell's, and I wasn't one of them. Didn't particularly like building sites, but mucky, dusty places.
When you went on your first building site after you'd left university, is it true that when you came away, there was an outage that took the electricity out of the whole of East Leeds?
Yeah.
Because of something you'd done. Was this your start in the building career?
It was really. I was to set the main drainage outlet from this massive housing site in South Leeds, just by the main ring road going through Cottingley, and I'd give them the wrong location, and I was driving home listening to the radio, and it said, and there's a big power outage in South Leeds, you know, that's off that, and I was driving down and those lights were going off, and I'm thinking, that's not me, is it? It was. They'd gone through the main cable. Fortunately, I didn't get fired because Yorkshire Electricity Board had put it not at the right height or quite in the right location, so I survived that little folks part.
And there are many other little faux pas in the book, by the way, that could have ruined
most people's careers.
Most people's career. You still haven't met up with Dennis Sewell. You were at university with him. You became friends with him. But you're out now working for another company, and then that amalgamates with another company.
Yeah.
And it wasn't for a little while until Dennis Sewell came back into your life.
After 5 years, he's been working for a national company. His dad wanted to retire and wanted Dennis to go back to the family company. They felt that the company had been run by 3 people. They were all retiring. They wanted somebody else, and Dennis asked me if I wanted to come back to Hull and work for his family company, and it was a great offer. It was I had a company car and there was no company car, and the salary was 2/3 of what I was getting, but I decided to come back home because I wasn't seeing my son grow up with all the working hours, and I just figured out that if you're happy with what you were doing, that you had a better chance of being successful. So I came back and took that sacrifice.
But you also said in the book you wanted to be in a small business environment. You didn't want to work for a big conglomerate.
No, I got the feeling, I worked for one of the multinationals, I got the feeling people were making judgments on me and my career somewhere in London that never even met me. And I preferred going back to Sewell and working for Dennis's dad. At least I would be looking at the guy and being with the guy who was making judgments on my career. And even now, I feel, you know, to treat your talent properly, you've got to give an input into their own career. Everybody's got one career, and I think what they deserve is a proper input into that one career. So the people who are making decisions on it are intimate with those people and fully engaged with those people. And that lesson I learned then, hopefully we implement at Sewell now.
Just to wind back a bit though, you had a bad start in the building trade. You had a bad start when you met Sue Wakefield, now the fabulous Sue, your wife, in the beer cellar in the Old Town when you were still a student at Leeds, because you offered to buy her a drink. I know what happened, Paul. Tell us what happened.
Well, I didn't have any money, did I? So I said, you know this drink I've offered you, would you have any money to pay for it? And bless her, she did.
Yeah, amazing that you're still together after all this time. So Dennis rings you up and says, you come into this company as a what? Immediately as a director?
Contracts manager with a promise of a directorship within 12 months if everything went okay.
So there's one Sewell family firm over there, the builders that you're attracted to. The Sewell Fruit and Veg is still going. Did your dad make any attempts to kind of bring you back to the kind of family business?
No, he was quite happy to have me out. In fact, it was that nobody ever said anything in our house, but I think they were actually quite proud, really, that I got the degree. And I never forget bumping into my brother and my father always used to talk about you in front of you as if you weren't there. And I was sat at the tea table one day.
Nodding heads there.
And my when I'd made the decision to stop on at school, do O-levels, which was unheard of in our family, my brother said to my dad, he's not coming to work then, Isaac. He was calling him Isaac of York. He's not coming to work then, Isaac. He said, no, he's stopping on to get an education. So I said, well, how long is that going to take then? He said, I don't know. He said, good education takes a long time. So my brother said, well, do you think he might leave school to retire then, Dad? He said, quite possibly. So I'm sat there listening to this. So there wasn't any really encouragement. You must go to that university. It was almost despite them. But they loved me, really.
Yeah, well, you're back at Sewell and you're now, in the job that will eventually become your company, although it was called Sewell then, by coincidence. But there's a very revealing bit. It was about that time you listened to John Lennon's, your great hero, working class hero, and you decide that you're not working class. And you also decide you're not middle class. And no one ever suggested you were upper class.
No, I don't know
so
that.
you thought of yourself as classless?
Yeah, I did. And I still do, Alan, to be honest. I was brought up with working class values, but a quite materialistic. My dad was a very successful businessman. His values didn't change, but he trapped me, and I became ostensibly quite a middle class, sort of materially, but the working class values was there. So there was times where I never felt I belonged anywhere, because when you're successful in business, you go back with your mates to play football, and there's a bit of reserve there because you're not quite like them, and you meet people who, in different classes, you're not quite like them because of the accent or whatever. So I'm classless but happy.
Yeah, you're certainly happy. But so if you look back at your career, can you spot the time when you first became a champion of employee satisfaction? That's the only way I know how to express this, because my experience of the outside of the business world in the 60s and 70s and 80s isn't of benign employers really keen and interested to hear what their employees feel or want to do. I mean, there might have been loads of them, but it wasn't the general view. It was a bit of a whose side are you on? But you picked this up very early in your
I picked it up in the football dressing room because if things are not going well in the first half in the football dressing room, you can expect the coach or manager to come in and start slamming doors and throwing teacups around and doing the normal waving the arm and shouting at you. And I used to sit there thinking, what a knob. I was looking at his behaviour rather than anything he was saying. And I thought, if I ever get that job, I'm not going to give my players a good talking to. I'm going to give them a good listening to. And it worked, because I got to be a coach, and if there's anything going wrong, I used to, and not every time, maybe 2 or 3 times a season, if things were going wrong, I'd say, right, you know things are going wrong, I know things are going wrong. You tell me what you think's going wrong. Well, he didn't come to training, he's not tracking back, he's not committed. And all of a sudden it kicked off and they resolved the issue themselves. They weren't sat there waiting for me to tell them. And I felt that if you get, I engaged those players into the solution. They were stakeholders in the solution for the second half. And I thought, well, that's what you really need to do for the really bright people you have working for you. You know, you engage them, listen to them. Listening is a key core skill. I think we said it in one of David Hall, Pat didn't we, the other day. Listening is a key core skill in the Sewell Group. Listen to your customers, listen to your employees. They will give you the answer. All back from listening to your players in that football dressing room.
There's something else about you, though, isn't there? Because you're interested in people. There are some amazing pen portraits in this book of people, well, the whole of your primary school football team, you name one by one. It's entertaining, don't let it put you off. And what happened to them. But then the people you worked with, it's not just the big, you know, company managers or whatever. You remember pen portraits in there of quantity surveyors and bricklayers. And there's a fabulous one, the foreman of the joiner's shop. You describe him as if he was there, as if you were kind of watching him. And what, did you take notes? Or is it just the fact that you're deeply interested in people and so it's all lodged there in your memory?
Well, you don't put a joiner or a quantity surveyor on the payroll, do you? You put a person on the payroll. And if you can see the person engage with the person beyond the role you want them to do for you, you're inevitably going to be more successful. You're gonna know when they're not performing and maybe, you know, why they're not performing or when there's something going on. And if they feel sort of some empathy from you, you're likely to get that last... you know, when we got in the Sunday Times top 100 places to work, I went to the States and they did some research that most people working in British business, well, any business who's in the States, are working, even the good ones, even the, you know, are working at about 80% of their full capacity. But really engaged people can get towards 100%. So we do all this stuff around engagement, because if you make that 80 to 100%, that's an extra 100 people at the Sewell Group for no extra wage bill. So people say it's fluffy and it's this, that, and the other. It's not. It's a business strategy.
It's soft, don't they? Soft.
Yeah, soft, and you know, we don't do it. No, it's a business strategy.
But your competitors are now doing this now. I mean, have you sort of watched the business community kind of change in your time so that these things now become more
absolutely.
entrenched? It's not just, I think what I'm asking is this just a kind of fad that people are going through? I know you do it because you believe in it, but will it change to something else?
I think it's got to, because of this war for talent, Alan. You know, kids coming out of colleges, universities, etc. now aren't going to put up with some of the things we put up with. They will choose to give you their talent for a year or two if you fancy, if you've got the right technology platform, if you train them, develop them, empathise with them, give them enough time off to do what they want, all that stuff. So we've got blended generations in our businesses now, and you can't treat the Zs and the Xs and the millennials like the baby boomers. You know, they're individual people, and so I think you've got to have a strategy for that. And they will pay you back in spades.
Yeah, you think it's here to stay?
Yeah, it's got to be.
And you've won, I mean, you mentioned the Sunday Times, but you've also achieved a lot at Sewell, including the expansion into, I guess, back to your roots when you went on to the retail side, Sewell on the Go, which Patrick runs now. That was almost a return to your dad's fruit stores, in a way.
Oh, yeah. Retailers are weird. Retailers are a race apart. If you go to a retail convention, it's like any other any other convention you've ever been to. So a retailer's a different skill, and Patrick loves it, and I'm sure Dad's up there looking down, smiling at the one doing.
Yeah. The only thing is you don't have a flash, do you?
No, flash is cash. Yeah.
Just explain what the flash is.
Flash is when you. My dad said, if you got your strawberries or your bananas or your orange, if you just sling them there next to people to fancy them, he said, no, people buy with their eyes, then the taste. You flash those strawberries up and then you say flash is cash. Spend time flashing this up. And we do it in the supermarket. You go in the supermarkets now to the fruit and veg stalls, they look like a market stall, don't they? Beautifully presented. Yes, the old man should get some commission from that, Alan.
Should do, yeah. But you also, I mean, you've got a number of accolades. The first PFI school in the country was Sewell at Vicky Dock. The Freedom Centre. Lift, which all these fabulous health centres around the city. They were all forms of public-private partnership. But PFI gets a lot of critics. I mean, where do you stand on the debate about public-private partnership?
Anything does well, that's done well. We're watching the football, the Euros, you and I. There will be some good games, there will be some crap games. Some people do PFI and PPP really well, and I like to think we're one of those. And some people do it abysmally, and they just come to take the family silver away from the public sector. Done well in city care and shared agenda, which you well know, it brings the best of the public and private sector together for a community to provide community assets, and keeps it off the government's balance sheet so that money can go to social care and where it needs to go to, rather than in infrastructure. We pour money into infrastructure. Yeah. If you provide the concession to collect an income to a company, that's what the PFI is all about, and let a company design, build, finance and operate it, and you just do the stuff inside, be it health, education or whatever. You can concentrate on what you're great at, and people who are great at raising money and doing estates can concentrate on what they're good at. Bring those people together in a company with joint directors, joint shareholders, etc. So there's no, you know, everything's open and above board. Lift was your government. You never took credit for it, particularly because it's a pretty Tory idea to rely on the private sector, but it was Blair's idea, wasn't it? Prescott
Terrible
was a
name as well, the Lift project.
Oh, PFI, you know, it's like a disease, doesn't it? But you know, we've got to come back to it, because we are not going to raise enough money as a country in tax to pay for the roads, schools, prisons and hospitals we need. Yeah. We've got to let the private sector raise the money against the government covenant, and then let our tax money go to pay nurses, doctors, teachers, social workers, all the stuff we need.
Yeah, well, there's a bit of a halt on anything to do with public-private sector, but the reason it's worked well is all those hospitals that were built back in the 30s and 40s, which were still being used, all those crumbling GP practices. You know, the NHS was a wonderful concept, but it was occupying terrible, old-fashioned, outdated buildings. The beauty about what you do now is the other bit of Sewell, which is the facilities management. So you keep them at day one condition. You build the health centres and then you make sure they're maintained at day one condition. Yeah. Did one follow the other? Did facilities management arise from Lift, being involved in Lift, or were you already into it?
No, it was before I was in Florida, and stopping at a nice place in Longboat Key in Sarasota, and this guy came past, you know, I was coming off the beach to go for a drink of water. This Floridian blonde guy came past with a van and pulled up in front of me, and it said, so-and-so facilities management. So I said, oh mate, what's that? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, we've got a maintenance company back in Hull. Oh, he said, no. He said, the people running this place, the Longboat Key Club, are great at looking after you folks, hospitality, etc., etc. They're not very good at looking after buildings. So he said they outsource that to us. So if there's anything wrong with the building, right with the building, you know, avoiding the problems, we do, and they just concentrate on what they're good at rather than getting involved with stuff they're not. And I brought that back to Hull, and 25 years ago, Sewell FM was formed not as a radio station, but as a facilities management company, and we needed that facilities management company to make the holistic offer back to government for the schools and health centres, etc. Right. So we kept it in-house.
Just before I open up to the audience, where you are now is a very good place for the Sewell Group. The Queen's Award for promoting opportunity was an amazing development for Hull and for the business community. You've stepped back a bit in the sense that you're no longer a managing director of the estates, Sewell Estates, but you're still very much the executive chair.
Well, I was always taught when you become the dumbest person in the boardroom, that's the time to quit. And I become the dumbest person in my boardroom a while ago. The talent that we've got coming through the business from all aspects, as you well know, you can't put any ceilings and inhibitors on their progress. So it's really time for me to step back and let them fulfil their potential.
Well, you say that, but you know, another Paul Simon, wrote Still Crazy After All These Years. You know, you just seem to be still looking for challenges, still restless after all these years. If Paul Simon was going to rewrite that for you, still restless, always looking for another challenge.
Oh, batshit crazy, as my grandson says. Yeah. What did Steve Jobs say? Stay young, stay foolish. You've got to do both. So yeah, we'll do that, I think.
And you've got now the your Half a Letters personal investment company. That's kind of where you're spending most of your time now?
Well, not most of my time. There's just half a dozen businesses and entrepreneurs I'm helping, and if they need investment, because you can't have a track record if you start out. Banks ask for a track record. These guys haven't got one. Somebody's got to have faith in them to give them some capital to start up, and that's what the investment company's all about. You know, to invest in the person rather than this business case you have to produce to a bank.
Right.
So we'll have a go at that.
I'm going to give you 5 minutes to tell, less than that actually, I've cut it down to 2 minutes. Right. Two truths, one lie.
2 truths, 1 lie. Well, when you surprised me with that in there just now, I immediately went to nothing in the book, because there's nothing in the book about the Yorkshire International Business Conference that we brought to Hull in 2004. And I got the privilege of meeting some amazing people and dealing with some amazing people, as I have this week, to be fair. You know, Steph McGovern, Baroness Varzy, amazing women. I got the same privilege doing that for 11, 12 years. We used to fly the speakers backwards and forwards from Hull to Harrogate, so the speaker could be used twice. And I was always worried about a sea rock stopping the helicopter. And we had the 3-time world heavyweight champion George Foreman on the helicopter, and he had to put down in Sherburn in Elmet because of the sea rock. And we sent a taxi for him to bring him to Hull. And this taxi was a Nissan, before the days of Uber, it was a Nissan Micra, and there was him and his son in this taxi. This guy's 6'5", 22 stone, and he's in a Micra, and he gets lost in Hull and ends up down Alliance Avenue trying to find the KC Stadium, gets out the car and walks into a newsagent on Alliance Avenue. The newsagent is having a slow day reading his paper, and he looks up, and there's George Foreman stood in front of him and say, "Do you know the way to the KC Stadium?"
Right, is it true or is it a lie? You have to judge. Number 2, that's number 1.
We had the privilege of having Archbishop Desmond Tutu come over, and he'd done the gig in Harrogate. He'd flown over to Hull, he'd done the press in Harrogate, then he did the press in Hull. And when I saw him in the green room, he looked pretty knackered, to be honest. He was a 70-odd-year-old bloke then. And I said to his aide, would the Archbishop like some quiet time to recover, because he's on at 2:15. And he said, "Oh, I think so." So we cleared the green room, shut the door, and just before 2:15, I went in, and he was like that. And he wasn't breathing. I thought, he's not snoring. I thought, he's dead. We killed Arthur Lucan on the Hull stage, Ulmer Raleigh, many years ago, and we've now killed an Archbishop. And so I said to his aide, "Are you going to wake him up?" He said, "I'm not waking him up." I said, "Well, you're his aide, I'm not his aide." And we stood, and the people were gathering out front. And anyway, it got to about 2:20, 5 minutes late to start out front. I said, "You must do it." So he went, like that. And I thought, oh, we haven't killed him, he's awake. And he went out 5 minutes later and got the greatest standing ovation we ever had at the YABC, no doubt because of the pregnant pause. Unfortunately, we used to have a very high lectern, and he stood behind the lectern and you couldn't see him. You just saw that anybody who was there that day could see, you just saw the top of his head. So I had a very unfortunate experience with the Archbishop.
And the third one?
Third one, I had a great long dinner at Harewood House, sat next to somebody who invented the World Wide Web called Tim Berners-Lee. And we got on really well, very engaging guy. And he said to me at the end of that dinner, he was really surprised about somebody of my age and background's knowledge of tech.
Okay, so number 1 is George Foreman. Number 2 is Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And number 3 is Paul being told by the founder of the World Wide Web that he's learnt stuff about tech from Paul. Who wants to have a go at which one the lie is? Yes.
How dare
You know, it's so bloody obvious, isn't it? I mean, you and tech and the World Wide Web.
You can talk.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm pretty bad. Just before I hand over to you for questions, this is a terrific book, and there are copies available. None of the money goes to Paul, by the way. It all goes to Sue's animal welfare charity, which I know Paul's also heavily involved in. But you've heard Paul give stories. I mean, many of you have heard him. He's a great raconteur. Let me tell you, not all great raconteurs can transfer them to print in the way that Paul does. It's a very vivid account, and I'm not saying that because he's here and he's a mate of mine. Yeah, it's really one of the most extraordinary books, memoirs, that I've ever read, and I've read a lot. Over to you for questions. Yes.
Very interesting. I expected to hear all about business strategy and, you're an entrepreneur. But as Alan said, it's all about people. That's what you talk about. And at one point you mentioned that, when you employ youngsters, you get a lot of people applying, and there are the sort of core stars who can choose anyone. But actually, you sounded like you're more interested in the other people who may not be, but actually are just as able and need to be given the chance. And they need nous. But how do you know that they're also just as capable, they're just not as shiny?
Well, you're right about the people bit, because people do business with people. Whatever they're doing, at the end of the day, people do business with people. And by the time I get involved, technical competence is assured. You've got to have that. You've got to have the hardware of the business right, which is your processes, structures, technical competence. The software, which is the people and relationship side, we assure then. So we got my head of people here. We do, I think we've 4 or 5 interviews or something like that. Most of them for cultural fit, most of them group exercises. And if I ever get a complaint on I remember you've got a website where it's tell Paul, email Paul of anything about the business. We had one for a few years, and never used to get a lot. But the complaints I used to get were all about trying to work for us. This is my 3rd interview. I've had enough, and this, that, and the, and one guy actually said, "I only want to come to work for you. I don't want to marry you." And I said, "But no, you've got it in one. You are coming. You're going to see more of us than you are of your wife. You are marrying us, so we're going to go that extra mile to make sure you're a cultural fit and you feel comfortable here." So the hardware of the business, I have to say I'm at a level where I just accept the fact that that's okay. Concentrate on the values and the culture of the business and make sure people who come feel happy here as a cultural fit.
All right, thanks, Ros. Yes.
Firstly, Paul, thank you for your Elevenses this week, because I think it's been brilliant, and I hope you bring it back for future years. But I am really sorry to say, Alan, but there's been a really terrible oversight, so I'm going to address that now. Paul, what was the first record you bought?
Oh, yeah.
And where did you get the money to buy it?
The most important question.
Oh God, it's so easy to ask the questions, isn't it? The first record I bought, this is what I've got in common with Alan, we're both massive Beatles fans. I think probably From Me to You, or She Loves You. That's 63, 64, something like that. So I'd have been 12, 11, 12. Because I was spoilt as a kid, and as Adam Pearson said, I got brought up soft and I had to turn hard. I was very much the same. My dad always had this thing on this old tea caddy on the side of on the top of the mantelpiece with half crowns and 2 bob bits in it. And if I ever wanted anything, I just used to. I didn't have to earn it, didn't have to go paper rounds or anything like that. So I got brought up soft as well. So, and I went down to the record shop in Cottingham and bought She Loves You.
Should have been Can't Buy Me Love.
Yeah.
Mine was Max Bygrave's Things Ain't What They Used to Be.
Really?
I'm ashamed to say. Yeah, sorry about that. Yes.
Following on that theme, Paul, another question that's been asked this week. If you could tell me just one thing, what would it be?
When I look back at my career, I never followed my instincts early enough. And we've heard this before, Pat, haven't we? But it is true. You know, you employ somebody, you know after 2 or 3 months, it ain't right. They're not a cultural fit, they're not happy. But you persist for a year because you don't want to be wrong in your employment decision. Looking back, I wished I'd followed my gut in things like that after 2 or 3 months rather than waiting a year to prove myself right.
Okay, and yes, hey, Charles.
Alan, just a statement rather than the question, which may just bring it all to a close. Paul taught me how to say thank you. It's very easy to say thank you, but it's not easy to say thank you the right way. This goes back to an occasion in Newport when Paul joined me at a Six Nations rugby match at the Millennium Stadium. We'd had a good afternoon, as you usually do. We'd gone back to our room in the hotel, and Paul rang me in some disarray to say that he was having medication to his eyes. And he rang me to say that he'd put not medication in his eyes, but the contact lens cleaning fluid, the abrasive contact lens cleaning fluid into his eyes. What we would do, we had to get to the hospital, so I very unwisely drove Paul to the Royal Gwent Hospital. The state I was in, it was probably inappropriate. We did well to get there. We get accident and emergency at the Royal Gwent Hospital on a Saturday evening, and those who've been to any A&E on a Saturday evening know what it's like. People are rowing, people are falling over, people are streaming blood, people are bruised, people have broken limbs.
And that was just me and you.
Paul was taken straight to treatment because this fluid, this contact lens cleaning fluid, could have damaged his eyes forever. You were only in there about 45 minutes, Paul, whilst they washed the fluid out. It wasn't very long. But Paul came out with the nurse, and it wasn't the way Paul said thank you. It was the manner in which he said thank you. It came from the heart, and Paul, I'll always recall, I always remember the look on that nurse's face when you said, "You're a real nurse." Those were your words, and I think there's something in that for all of us. To say thank you when you don't really mean it is actually meaningless. To say thank you when it comes from your heart, it means a hell of a lot. And thank you for the guidance you've given all of us over all the years as well, Paul.
Thank
Well
you.
done, Charles. Any other questions? Okay, yes, go on.
So we've heard from a few people this week about what their plans are in the next sort of 12 months and beyond in terms of their bucket lists and what's left to achieve, Paul. So what still is there as sort of big challenges to overcome for you going forward?
Well, within the Sewell Group, we've not reached our full potential yet. You know, and we've got this huge amount of talent in the group, and I want to hang around and see and maybe help here and there them reaching their full potential. And just what's happened this year, just what's happened during COVID, to see the business perform, to see how a business can perform when you get the right people in the building with the right cultural fit and the right attitude, all pointing in the same direction. Has been amazing. It's been a massive fillip for me to see that. And I want to stop batshit crazy with some of these young entrepreneurs I'm dealing with, and they give you life and energy, and if I can help them at all, that's great.
Okay.
Do you give in? Have we gone on till you give in?
Well, a lot more questions than some of the other guests have had. Thank you. Can I ask you to put your hands together for a great servant of Hull and a great member of the Hull business community, but a great man, Paul Sewell.
Thanks, Alan.